Every now and again, extreme road conditions or especially dangerous roads can put even the best drivers out there in a bit of a bind. However, despite these circumstances, there are some that manage to save themselves in even the most unlikely of circumstances. Today, we're taking a look at the top 15 best drivers in the world. Number 15. The lake escape. Most would consider a truck stuck in a lake to be gone for good, but this driver proved that this is certainly not always the case. And while the origins of this video are unclear, what is clear is that the truck driver is in a pretty precarious position, as his truck is stuck upside down in a lake and seems to have partially sunk into the mud beneath it. Regardless, he manages to get the truck back on its wheels, and from there drives it out of the depths and onto land. And while we certainly don't recommend getting yourself into this type of predicament, we guess that it just goes to show that good drivers can get themselves out of even the worst situations. Number 14. Kidnapping gone wrong. In many areas of the world, kidnapping is a serious problem, as affluent people will often be captured by street thugs so that they can collect high ransoms. And while they are often successful, in this instance a man escaped kidnapping by simply ramming into the car of his kidnappers. Now, CCTV cameras show a Mexican man parking into a garage when 5 men pull up in a blue truck and try to take him away. However, the man doesn't allow this to happen and instead slams into their getaway car at full speed, running over one of his kidnappers in the process. This stuns his attackers, and while they eventually collect themselves, he reverses slightly and then drives away as fast as he could. And while the video is certainly cool to watch, on our end we are pretty confident that the kidnappers weren't expecting such a colossal confrontation. Number 13. Boulder Avoider. Being hit by a landslide is one of the worst things that can happen to a driver, as the falling dirt and debris can easily sweep your car off the road and lead to your demise. A driver from Taiwan knew this all too well in this video, which was captured by the dash cam of the person behind them. That's because after realizing they were caught in a landslide, they wisely chose to slam the brakes and stop the car rather than try to drive through. This proved to be prudent, as the car didn't experience any serious damage, with a boulder that could have easily quashed the car, even stopping right before reaching it. Thus, this quick thinking likely saved both the car and the car driver's life. Number 12. The Inbetweener. Driving down a 2-lane road is usually pretty self-explanatory, as one car will be going one way and the other the opposite way. Yet there are some cars that get annoyed at this setup and try to get around it by driving into oncoming traffic in order to pass a slow-moving vehicle. And while this is illegal and quite dangerous, it can be done effectively if there are no cars in the opposite lane. However, in this case, a car that was in the opposite lane got the tail end of this maneuver while being pinned by a truck, but rather than crash into the oncoming car, they expertly swerved between the two vehicles. And while the icy conditions caused the car to then swerve off the road, the broken windshield that came as a result was a lot better than the fatal crash that could have occurred. Number 11. The Ice Road Trucker. While driving in the frigid Arctic isn't exactly the most desirable job in the world, there are some truckers out there that choose to move up north and do so for a living. As such, their journeys are often the stuff of legend, and thus the History Channel has seen a lot of success in filming their daring drives on the hit show Ice Road Truckers. However, out of all the moments it's documented, perhaps one of the scariest occurred when a trucker had to cross a frozen lake with a record-breaking load in tow. This is because he not only almost passed another truck, which would have caused the ice they were both on to collapse, but he experienced constant cracking which could have easily led to his truck going under. However, he thankfully managed to avoid this and was able to miraculously make it to the other side safely. Number 10. The HighSpeed Hellcat. While we don't suggest breaking the law, Mohammed Ahmed Abu Shleiba did so in spectacular fashion by not just outrunning police cars in a high-speed chase, but even getting a leg up on a police helicopter that was following along. Now, the getaway occurred in October of 2017, when he led police officers from Houston, Texas, on a pursuit along Interstate 10. It was while driving on this highway at speeds of about 200 kilometers an hour that he was able to evade capture, and went so fast that even the police chopper that was tasked with reporting his coordinates eventually lost sight of him. However, he eventually got off the highway near the small town of Winnie, Texas, and made the not-so-bright decision to pull over to the side of the highway and take off on foot into a wooded area. This ultimately led to his capture by police when he was found casually walking and talking on his phone in the middle of a cow pasture. As a result, he was convicted of evading arrest in March of 2019 and is currently in the middle of a 3-year sentence. Number 9. The Pigeon Protector. Generally speaking, pigeons aren't exactly the most well-liked birds on the planet, After all, they're often referred to as the rats of the sky, as their tendency to eat garbage and infest urban areas doesn't exactly make them all that likable to city dwellers. However, a Toronto taxi driver who was later identified as Mr. Utralinkam obviously doesn't feel the same hatred. That's because after seeing a pigeon that was stranded on the street in busy traffic, he stops his taxi, puts on his gloves, and picked up the bird. He then walked it across 3 lanes of oncoming traffic and a bike lane with the bird in tow, putting himself at risk of getting hit in order to save the poor creature. After crossing, he then placed it safely on the sidewalk and walked back to his car, then drove away, with this being done all while being complimented by the people filming him on their cell phones. This ended up getting him a lot of attention on social media, with the viral video getting supportive comments from people all across the city. Thus, we guess this incident just goes to show that not all heroes wear capes. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. The Crafty Cash Van. Unfortunately, armored vehicles tend to be a prime target of thieves, as the valuables held within them are often very attractive to those who are in need of some quick cash. And while these attacks are successful from time to time, security guards driving a cash van were able to stop one from happening despite the local police running away from the scene. The incident occurred in the impoverished community of Soweto in South Africa, and first began when the thieves in the minibus taxi tried to shoot the tires of an armored vehicle parked outside of Teshpo Temba Private Hospital. Yet rather than give up the valuables, the armored van drove away, which caused the thieves to continue to shoot at the vehicle. When the police who were pursuing the thieves got wind of what was happening, they quickly began to drive in the other direction, leaving the armored car alone in its escape from the minibus. However, the van eventually made it to the parking lot of a police station, and at this point the thieves fled. And while their van had several bullet holes in it and sported completely punctured tires, the two were hailed as heroes for making this daring escape, despite the police officers on duty being too afraid to come to their aid. Number 7. Truck on fire. There are few things on the road that are as scary as fire, as getting involved in one can easily lead to you or a loved one losing their life. As such, most people would likely bail from their vehicle as soon as it caught on fire. But a truck driver by the name of Earl Gibson chose not to do so. Hailing from East Texas, the trucker was driving down the highway when his engine burst into flames. Yet rather than panic, he calmly drove the truck to the center of the road, where there was little traffic. And rather than run away, made 2 very calm and collected phone calls while inside the vehicle. The first was to his wife, which he said, "Honey, my engine is blown and it's on fire. I can't talk right now. I've got to move the engine out of the way and then I have to go because I've got to jump." Then, after calling the police, he did exactly that. Thanks to him placing the truck in a safe spot, nobody got injured from this incident. Thus, we think it's fair to say that Mr. Gibson is certainly one of the better truck drivers out there. Number 6. The Pole Pummeler. Typically speaking, hitting an electric power pole is a pretty bad thing, as it not only knocks out the power of nearby buildings, but could easily lead to both yourself and those around you being electrocuted. Yet in this situation in Australia, a truck driver felt that they had to do so in order to save the life of another driver. You see, the trucker was going down a residential street when a woman in her 40s pulled out of a driveway, backing up onto the road. However, it became clear that she was not paying attention and that she would crash into him. So in order to stop this from occurring, he veered to the side, making him crash into a power pole. Now, on the surface, this was a pretty poor outcome, as it led to more than 2,000 local customers losing power, with a few hundred having to wait up to 12 hours before the power was restored. However, he defended his actions by saying that, quote, "If I hadn't done that, the woman in the car wouldn't be here today," with the reporting media outlet confirming that this was the case. Thus, while the situation wasn't all that pretty, this driver certainly proved that intentionally hitting a power pole isn't always a bad idea. Number 5. The Bush Trucker. Generally speaking, American highways are pretty top-notch, as most receive regular maintenance from road crews and are relatively safe to travel on. However, in a documentary about truckers in Africa, Vice exposes that this isn't always the case abroad. In particular, the documentary follows the route of an American trucker working in Africa by the name of Ray Sines, who was tasked with bringing UN vehicles from South Africa to South Sudan, with him having to drive them for about 5,000 kilometers through the countries of Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Uganda while en route. As you might expect, this journey ends up being a little rocky, as these countries are not only quite dangerous, but are also not all that conducive to long-haul trucking in a big rig. The first major problem occurs before the journey even begins, as the truck that Ray is given is absolutely atrocious. In fact, it's so close to breaking down that he refuses to use it. However, after some quick repairs, he finally decides to hop on. Yet it doesn't take long for him to have some truly terrifying encounters. The first comes when his truck is hit by a drunk driver while in Uganda, which totals the drunk driver's car, but luckily barely scrapes his own. However, this likely messes with the internal components of Ray's truck quite a bit, and it doesn't take long for it to begin bleeding gear oil faster than an open bullet wound. Yet rather than give in, him and his partner instead have the ingenious idea of using bananas as a substitute, jamming them into the gears so that they would stay lubricated. When this is then combined with the tiny one-lane highways, terrible road conditions, and many near-death experiences they face, we think it's fair to say that Ray truly is a top-notch driver. Number 4. Florida man drives through tornado. Whenever you see a news caption online with the title "Florida Man," you know that you're in for a treat. Yet as far as these stories go, this one is definitely a contender for being one of the craziest. Now, the driver in question was a man by the name of Anthony Chirochi, and he was driving through Pompano Beach, Florida on February 16th of 2016 when he noticed other cars beginning to stop. Upon seeing this, Chirochi began to become enraged as he believed that he was in the middle of a hurricane and that the drivers around him were being foolish. As such, despite the looming funnel-shaped cloud forming over him, he began to speed down the busy road, dodging parked cars and debris while swearing the entire time. However, what he didn't realize is that he wasn't driving through a hurricane, but a series of 2 tornadoes, both of which came very close to catching his car, with one even going so far as to rock his vehicle. Yet despite this, Chirochi appeared on the other side of the 2 storms unscathed. As you might imagine, Chirochi got quite a bit of hate after posting the dashcam video of this event on YouTube. However, he defended himself vigorously in the comment section, saying that, quote, "If any one of the naysayers has ever driven in South Florida during any storm, you would know it comes down in sheets. Roads flood quickly, and you have to keep your eyes on the road. I was driving and watching the road, not the sky." Yet while this daring escape cements Chirochi as being one of the greatest drivers of all time, most experts warn against doing what he did. Rather, storm experts advise that drivers leave their vehicles and seek shelter if a tornado is bearing down, and if no shelter is nearby, that drivers should lay down in a ditch or low-lying area and wait for the tornado to pass. As such, this video may be cool to watch. We don't suggest trying a similar stunt yourself. Number 3. The forest fire. While tornadoes may be a pretty terrible thing to drive through, we'd argue that forest fires are just a tad bit worse. After all, the intense heat that comes off of them can make it extremely difficult to breathe, and an inferno in your path could easily lead to a car being engulfed in flames. And while most people will thankfully never have to deal with this predicament, in August of 2018, a father-son duo hiking through Glacier National Park in Montana had to contend with the massive Howe Ridge fire. Now, the two had noticed that the fire was coming, so they returned to their rental car and, believing that they were far enough away, began to drive to safety. However, it soon became apparent that the wildfire was a lot closer than it appeared, and soon they saw all the vegetation around them engulfed in flames. At first, this wasn't too big of a problem, as the road was still clear and they were periodically able to drive away from any major flare-ups. But then, less than 2 minutes into the video, they had to stop in front of a downed tree, which was both burning and blocking the road ahead of them. At this point, the video stopped, as the two got out of the vehicle and tried to move the tree. When this proved impossible, the two re-entered the car and the father began to drive all the way backwards in reverse to go back to where they came from. And while this was almost an impossible feat in and of itself, it brought the two back to where they started from, and this prompted them to abandon the car and set off on foot to nearby Lake McDonald, where they saw 2 park workers with a motorboat. The pair ended up getting rescued by these workers, who in all likelihood saved their lives. However, had the father not driven through multiple kilometers backwards in the thick smoke and intense heat of the wildfire, they wouldn't be alive to tell their tale today. Number 2. The Pedestrian Protector. While most of the people on this list use their driving prowess to save themselves, Eric Marciano stands apart for using his car to save other people. Now, the story begins with a 19-year-old driver from Montreal, Canada, who decided to run a stop sign while driving around town. However, upon seeing a police officer, he stopped halfway, backed up, and obeyed the sign. Yet despite this, he still got pulled over. This caused the driver to flee the scene, with the police officer eventually cornering him onto a side street. However, it was at this point that the 19-year-old pulled a gun on the officer, and while neither shot, he used this distraction to once again try to drive away. It is at this point that a heroic driver by the name of Eric Marciano enters the story. This is because as the 19-year-old tried to flee the cop for a second time, he began to zoom through the residential neighborhood he was in at extremely fast speeds. Seeing this take place, Eric Marciano decided to stop this runaway car by pulling up in front of it with his Mercedes SUV, honking his horn and jumping out the driver's seat in the nick of time. And while his car was totaled in the affair, he got away with no injuries, and it was at this point that the 19-year-old was arrested and sent to the hospital. When asked about the incident by reporters, Marciano replied that, quote, "I was just thinking of the pedestrians that had to go home that night, and I figured that it was something I had to do," end quote. Therefore, while this act was certainly very heroic, we think you'd agree with us that it was a tad bit crazy as well. Number 1. The Amphibious Jeep. While most of the drivers on this list didn't choose to put themselves into a crazy situation, in 1950 Ben and Eleanor Carlin made the conscious decision to circumnavigate the globe in an amphibious Jeep. Now, the amphibious vehicle they chose was called the Half-Safe, which was a fitting name when you consider that it was barely a seaworthy vessel. After all, the Half-Safe was made using a repurposed 1942 GPW Amphibious Jeep, which was built by Ford for the U.S. Army, but canceled almost immediately due to it barely being able to make it through shallow streams for even a small 5-minute interval. Regardless, after making some upgrades, Ben and Eleanor were confident in its abilities on the open ocean, and thus after 3 failed attempts, the 4th and final one began in early September 1949, when the couple set off from the port of Halifax, which is a city on the east coast of Canada, in hopes of circumnavigating the globe. As you might imagine, they faced trouble pretty quickly, as they barely had enough food and began experiencing hallucinations as the journey progressed. However, after a treacherous 3,200-kilometer journey, they made it to the Azores, which are a group of islands off the coast of Portugal. After stopping there for repairs, they eventually left and finally touched the continent of Africa in February of 1951, after arriving in Cape Juby, Morocco. They then spent the rest of the year touring Europe, and after resting in Birmingham, England for the winter of 1952, chose to stay on the continent for a few years in order to make some cash, with the two raising money by both displaying the Half-Safe in various department stores and selling copies of a book Ben wrote about their travels across the Atlantic. Then in 1955, the couple set off across the rest of Europe and through the Middle East, which Carlin actually described at times as being more treacherous than their ocean journey. The two continued until they eventually arrived in Australia, where Carlin visited relatives and Eleanor chose to abandon ship. Yet Carlin nonetheless opted to continue on alone, often picking up travel mates along the way as he journeyed to India, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan. From Japan, he then went island hopping up to a small Russian town, and from there drove across the northern Pacific in order to reach Alaska. From there, he drove down to Montreal, Canada, reaching the city on May 13th of 1958, after almost 8 years of travel. Therefore, since he's one of the only people in human history to circumnavigate the world in an amphibious vehicle, we believe that he's worthy of the top spot on this list. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.